Very good afternoon, everybody. How are we all doing here at the Radio Theatre? You've obviously had a lunch, which is very good. It's kind of dulled enthusiasm. We'll try that again. Let's raise the roof here. How are you doing? That is more like it. You know, I suffer for my art, and now you're going to too. What a fabulous morning we've had. What a fabulous morning we've had, talking about some of the issues that are important with the leaders. I actually think there are people who know more than me. In fact, actually, I think Colin the Cane of Courage, as I call my white stick, knows more than I do about some technical things, at least if you listen to some of our colleagues. So I think it's about time now. I want a drum roll, please, or a clap for all staff call for the COO group. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mr. Ben Thompson.
So yes, welcome to those who are in the Radio Theatre here at the London Broadcasting House, and also across the UK as we join our COO colleagues, COO group colleagues, wherever you are, wherever you're sitting, whether you're at the desk or on the comfy sofa having a cup of tea, you're very welcome. I'm Ben Thompson. I'm here with you to guide you over the next hour. And one of the things we're doing today is our audio description. So this is where we describe ourselves so that we can be totally inclusive. So let me get underway. So I'm Ben. I'm 50 years old. Yes, I know I don't look it. The years have been kind. And I'm here in a floral shirt, blue trousers, brown shoes, and a little bit of what I would like to describe as designer stubble. So that's me, and I'm Ben. But yeah, we're going to be meeting the people alongside me. So we have Lee Tavatsiva, who's the Chief Operating Officer. We've got Azer Kadir, who is our Chief People Officer. And of course, we have Chinny Okilodo, who's our Diversity Director of Diversity and Inclusion. And at the end, we're going to be meeting Zara So as well, who's the chair of our Next Generation Committee, who's going to be holding our panel to account. But you can also hold that panel to account as well, because there are questions available. So if you're in the audience, if you can gesticulate in a proper way, then we can come and get your questions. But if you're wherever you are at your desktop, you can have a go at the questions. Just fill in the box below the streaming service, and they will appear here, and we'll get your questions put through to our panel. We'll also be having a showcase of things which are happening around the COO group, things we can be really proud of, but also challenging ourselves as going, yeah, we're doing okay, but there's considerably more to do. So let's get that underway and turn first to you, Lee, if we can, and just tell us, you know, how are we doing? What is your take? This is Inclusion Means Business. Are we looking at a successful group or more things to do?
Yeah, great, Ben. Well, look, I'm delighted to be back on the stage again here at Radio Theatre, and welcome to everybody else on Zoom as well. So I'm Lee Tavatsiva. I am a white female. I have grey hair, glasses on my head, reading glasses. I can't go anywhere without them. I am wearing blue trousers and a blue blazer and a red shirt today. We had such a fantastic morning, and I also wanted to say a huge thanks to Sean, who was just absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Sean, for giving us your time today and sharing it with everybody in the COO division. We are a really diverse division, actually. When you think about, you know, all the different functions, all the different skill sets that make up people who work in the sort of our operations team here. And we have 5,000 people, actually. And one of the things that I was really pleased to see, based on the recent employee survey feedback, which I think really, and particularly around diversity and inclusion, is that it was one of our highest scoring measures based on feedback from all our teams. So 78%, that was several percentage points higher than the BBC, and a year-on-year improvement. And there's sort of two main questions that make up that. And I'm going to put my glasses on, because otherwise I can't read them and I won't get them right. I can be my authentic self here, and my manager builds an inclusive team environment. And both of those questions improved year on year. So they improved this year in the survey from last year. And that is just so, so important, because, you know, inclusive environment is based on how we as individuals feel. We talked a lot about that this morning and kind of what it means to us, and we shared some personal stories. But actually, the feedback we hear from staff and from everyone in the team sharing their feedback on that to see that improve. Now, of course, we're going to keep aiming to get those scores higher and higher, and that's why we're having the kind of day we're having today. But look, it's great to have this all-staff call, and if you didn't join this morning, I hope it was recorded, or people can catch up with it if they missed it. And we've got such a great lot of sessions, haven't we, planned for this afternoon, and then all the Zoom sessions tomorrow as well, which I'm sure we'll share more about if people don't yet know what those all are. But yeah, great to be here, and thanks, Ben, for hosting this session.
Hey, and safe to say that, yes, everything is recorded. You can catch up at your leisure, and they'll all be available by the end of the week. Fingers crossed is what we'll try and do with that. But yeah, it was a fascinating conversation this morning between yourselves. And is that the important thing, do you think, Lee, that we need to be talking about this?
I think so, and actually, we should be comfortable sometimes in an uncomfortable situation. That's where we really learn, right? I think when we listen and we're open. And we all know, right, when we take a day out of our day jobs to actually, whether that's training or to go and do something that we enjoy or team building or just these kind of conversations, it means a lot to be able to learn, reflect, listen, understand, ask difficult questions, and also, maybe feel a bit uncomfortable at times. I learned a lot this morning. I was sharing first thing this morning. It's the first time I've ever done that sort of audiovisual description ever in my career, and actually that really makes me think. Sean was telling us some really super interesting stories. We heard Azer's personal story as well. Jenny, I hope we're going to hear a personal story or thought from you too. We didn't quite get the chance earlier today, but stories are the things. That's how we learn, and so these kind of conversations I think are so important.
Definitely, thank you, Lee. Azer, alongside there, you shared a very personal story this morning, and it was, I think, compelling to listen to, and the audience was hanging on every word. But you also focus a lot around employee experience, and that's a phrase that you're using a lot as you make your way around the organization. To a layperson like me, what does an employee experience look, feel, smell, taste like?
Well, Ben, thank you so much, and I hope everybody can hear me. I love that question because I'm quite passionate about employee experience. We're going to have to cancel the rest of the events, and this is going to turn into a 10-hour TED Talk. Buckle up. No, I'm quite passionate about it, and it's quite relevant to what we are here to talk about today as well. So employee experience, I believe, is the future of HR. It's the heartbeat of an organization in some ways. And I think about employee experience as the 5 E's of employee experience. The first one being entice. Even before an organization knows you or you know a company that you're applying for, is that company doing all the things to entice the right people the right way into the organization? That's how your recruiters connect with candidates and inspire them to be a part of your organization and support them through the interview process. What does your employer branding look like? The second E is enter. I think that as organizations, we have to compel ourselves to think about entrance a little bit differently. Today, we think about it simply as onboarding and induction, but is it really? Should we be thinking about entrance as a moment, one, to immerse people into corporate values, culture, intimacy with the customer, in our case, the audiences, so people can have a jump start in their careers into the organization. But also, we should think about entrances in a modern way. Entrance isn't just for a new employee. Entrance may be for an employee that may have stepped out for a significant period of time for a leave or for a paternity or a maternity cause. So when you're away for that long, why can't we re-enter them successfully into the organization? Just because they had to step out doesn't mean they have to fall behind. And we can take some onus and partnership in that. The third E is then engage. All the programs that HR teams create in a company to engage people the right way, whether that's reward, whether that is leadership development, training, all of those sorts of things. The fourth E is empower, and I think that's so important. Are we taking considerations of diversity and inclusion into account? Do we have the right sorts of are our rewards empowering people the right way? Do we have support conditions for every employee to succeed within a company? Do we have processes and systems that allow them to do their work efficiently, effectively, and in a meaningful way? And the last E, often the most overlooked and forgotten one, is exit. We dance around our colleagues when we enter them into the organization, yet we sometimes forget that exiting them gracefully from an organization is also a meaningful part of their career journey within the company, but also of our interaction with them. And if we are able to exit our colleagues the right way, whether that's through exit interviews to gain their insights, helping them move on to sometimes more compelling opportunities and reinforcing the idea of the BBC being a revolving door through which they're welcomed again, we can then create a system in which they leave feeling like colleagues for life and ambassadors of our company and our experience. So I think about the 5 E's, and Ben, very, very quickly, diversity and inclusion sits at the heart of it. Is your employer branding diverse and inclusive? Is your employer branding speaking to everybody? Are your processes nimble and account for all people to create conditions so they can belong, what I talked about this morning? And I think that's really, really important. So as Chief People Officer, of course, it's my hope that we'll continue to focus and work together to create a compelling and a uniquely BBC employee experience. And a step to do that, and I'm going to do a little plug here, I know that, is the census. I know I've talked about it 6 times today, so this is probably the 7th time. But we are, I really encourage you, and I encourage you to encourage everybody in your orbit to take part in the census, because if you don't raise your hand, and if you don't declare that you're here, if you don't self-identify, then there is no way for the BBC to know that you're here. And if we don't know you're here, we can't create conditions for you to succeed. And then you lose your right to complain that conditions don't exist for you to succeed. So please, take part in it so we know that you're here, we understand the makeup of our workforce, and then we can think about over next year or so, what do we need to do to help you succeed as well?
Thanks, Azar. And one thing I didn't let you do was your audio description.
Oh.
So please.
Thank you for reminding me of that. I was so excited about employee experience, I jumped straight to that. I wasn't joking when I said, get ready, I'll talk about it forever. And of course, my name is Uzair Kadir, Chief People Officer. I'm a South Asian man. I'm in a brown suit, a pink shirt, a pink pocket square, brown shoes, and pink socks. And my pronouns are he, him.
Thanks, Azar. And we'll have more questions for Azar and Lee. But let's come to you as well, Chinny. Again, do your audio description for us, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So I'm Chinny. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion. I am a black woman. I've got curly brown hair. I'm wearing a long dress, patterned dress, and gold shoes. So Uzair reminded me I had to say. Gold shoes.
And how are you finding, when you look at this event that we're doing, the Inclusion Means Business, what does that mean to you as the Director of Diversity and Inclusion?
I think diversity inclusion in particular is something that you can't have, you need to have within the organisation. There's no point working towards diversity if you're not going to have inclusion. That's the thing that's really going to ensure that our efforts are successful, and eventually moving toward a sense of belonging where everyone in the organisation feels that they can belong here. I talked earlier in the first session about some of my thoughts and beliefs and why I'm so passionate about D&I. For me, it's more than just a job. It's more than just a career. For me, it's purpose. And I'd love to kind of share why that is. So my heritage is Nigerian. I was born in the UK to Nigerian parents. My mother and father come from 2 different tribes. Interesting, my mother is actually a princess. My grandfather was a king of an area in Nigeria, and she happened to fall in love with a man from a different tribe that he considered to be the wrong tribe. It's kind of like a modern-day Romeo and Juliet story, but a little bit less drama. Because she decided to marry him, my grandfather actually disowned her. So it was very, very tough for her. But obviously then I was born, and I was very, very cute, and my grandfather obviously had no choice but to bring the family back together. But what that taught me was, I guess, before I even knew it, I really played the role of a unifier and just shifting perspectives. And over the course of the years, my grandfather and father became the best of friends. But what it taught me is that sometimes you can make a perception and have a perception of somebody, not even really know them just because of where they're from. But actually, when you take the time to get to know them, it can be really powerful. And then you have people like me that came from, experiences like that, and just bringing different communities together. And so I've always played that role of a unifier, and something I have continued to do, and I'm grateful to be able to do within D&I. And inclusion, I think, is also part of just shifting those perspectives, making sure that you take the time to get to know the person beside you, because we are more than who we seem. We're more than just how we identify. There's so much more actually that connects us and divides us. So inclusion is incredibly important for that reason.
Chinny, thank you very much indeed. And I think as any commissioners, I think we've got a nice BBC Three series lined up there, which would be good. Write that one down. Zara, we will come to you shortly, because I know you've got some questions for the panel a little bit later on. And don't forget, you can still ask your questions as well. If you're in the audience, we'd like to hear from you. And also, if you're listening at your desk, get writing those questions in now. But let's hear about other things which are happening around the COO group, because there is lots of good practice, lots of things to celebrate. So we're going to welcome 4 folk up on stage here now. And we're going to start off, I believe, with you. Laura Ellis is here from R&D. Come up to the podium. Some people clap when you come up.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm behind a podium. Good. I'm getting a thumbs up at the back. Hello, everybody on their laptops at home. As you say, my name is Laura Ellis. I work for BBC R&D. I'm a 5'2", I promise. They tell me 5'1", but I don't believe them. White woman. I'm wearing some very spectacular cowboy boots and a flowery dress. And my pronouns are she, her. It is so lovely to be here today at this event because I feel so passionately about what we do in this area, and it's just such a treat to be here. So thank you very much for having me. I want to tell you how it feels to be in R&D. Now, that sounds like a bit of a touchy-feely thing to say, but I'm going to give you some facts about some of the things we've done around diversity and inclusion, but I also want to tell you what it feels to be part of a BBC that feels so utterly passionate about this. So let me start with looking externally, and we mentioned this a little bit just this morning, and I just want to expand on it a little bit. So in R&D, one of the key things is that we spend a lot of time thinking about our audiences. It used to be that with technology, technology was the thing that you used to get your content out. It was just there. You had your content, and that was the beautiful stuff, and the technology kind of got it there. It's so different these days. We all know, and Sean made the point so beautifully this morning, that technology is so much more important to us these days when it comes to how we experience the content that the BBC creates and that it publishes. And R&D does a lot of thinking along the lines of how can we make sure that the technology that we adapt, that we adopt, that we build is inclusive, that the design is inclusive, that everybody feels involved, that everybody feels they can access the BBC's content through the technology that we design. And as we get into this really enhanced AI era, that's going to be even more important when we think about the ethics of what we create, we think about the ethical design of what we do, and we think about all those ways in which we need to be industry leaders to make sure that we're enacting the public values that we have in the content that we distribute and how we distribute it. So it's something we think a lot about, and I just wanted to put that out there because it's such a fantastic place to be when you're looking at those things, because you feel as though you're making a difference and that you can make a difference. And I'm so proud to be a part of it, and I'm so proud to work with colleagues that think about this every day of their working lives. As for what it's like inside of R&D, that's great too. So we have a diversity and inclusion group. We spend quite a lot of time talking about things, and I was just thinking, Isaiah, when you were talking about entering the BBC, we've been doing a lot of thinking about recruitment. How do we make it better? How do we make sure we're inviting in the widest group of people possible? How much more diverse could we be? And how can we make those early days in BBC organisation feel really good? So we've been doing a really big rethink of our induction and thinking about how can we make that feel inclusive? You know, is it neurodiverse enough? Does it give you enough of a sense of wanting to take part and feeling proud to be part of the organisation? So that's something which, led by Jatin, who I can see in the audience, we've spent some time on. We spend quite a lot of time talking about pan-BBC conversations too, because the thing about R&D is we are right across the BBC. Oh my goodness, I'm getting wound up. I don't realise I've been talking for so long. I'm going to quickly just knock this bit off. So we do think an awful lot about what the big conversations are that we can have with news, with other people, with other parts of the BBC. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to a very dear colleague of mine who used to work with me, and Philip Robinson's going to tell us what they're doing in BBC Product. And so I'm going to hand the microphone to him. I'm so sorry I ran over a little bit, but as you can see, we've got a lot to talk about. If you want to talk to me in the coffee break about any more of it, please do. Philip.
It's always good to get applause before you speak. It's like getting paid before you deliver, but you can't take it back. Anyway, so I'm Philip. I'm a little bit taller than Laura, so about 5'5". I'm from Barbados, so Bajan Caribbean man with a compromised accent from a few years in Northern Ireland. Low haircut. I have a beard. 5 years ago it was pure black, but now it's a bit white as well. Anyway, I'm going to talk about describing yourself is a very interesting exercise because the way you see yourself is how you see others. And diversity and inclusion is all about how we see each other. I'm going to talk about 3 principles from the product group and then 4 phases. The first principle is this. It's not about the numbers. So I want you to remember that. We set numbers, we set targets, but what we do is not about the numbers. They are indicators that what we're doing is good practice. The second principle is, what is it about? It's about the experiences. And Uzair talked a lot about experience, and that's what we focus on. And when we think about experience, we think about the stories that people tell. We think about that entire journey, going from onboarding, but even before onboarding, there's the whole recruitment. So one of the things we did is we actively looked at our numbers. We did look at the numbers and recognize we weren't performing really well in leadership in certain demographics, and we changed the way we did outreach. So we've invested in coding black females, for example, to start looking at how do we get more black women into coding. The third principle is tied to that second one, and that's simply this, that relationships matter. And that underlies everything that we do in diversity and inclusion. And the way we've done that is that we have woven D&I into practice. So it's not a set group that's aside that's doing D&I. D&I is not a way of working that we do, it's a way of being that we have within the product group. And one of the ways we've done this is we've actually created 4 different types of communities. And the first community is called the community of belonging. And the communities of belonging are opportunities for people to come together and advocate for each other, but also talk about things that they have in common. And the start of any relationship and connection is commonality. So I'll talk about two types of communities of belonging. One is around, I'm looking to get a signal, but I'm not. That's fine, so I'll keep going. One is there's a community that's been created, thank you. There's a community that's been created for people with chronic illnesses, and they meet together and support each other and sort of advocate for each other and look for ways that we can change policy. We also had quite a few listening groups who supported in support of our trans colleagues after there were some editorial messages that didn't sit quite well with them. And that's part of who we are. And that's the way we work in the product group. I'll be hanging out with Laura, so if you're looking for me, look for Laura, you'll see me. But I'm going to hand over to Candice, who's going to tell us more about the Quality Assurance Panel.
Thank you, Phil. Hi, everyone. My name's Candice. I'm late 30s, white Caucasian, brown, mid-length hair. Disclosed now my age to somebody who asked the other day. It's no secret anymore. I'm here today to talk about, I'm actually in BBC Spark, but I have the good fortune to sit on the Diversity Inclusion Panel, or now called the People Panel, that's part of Quality Risk and Assurance. And so the faces that will pop up on the screen in just a moment are all the members of our People Panel, old and new, some alumni down the bottom. This People Panel I want to talk about today and share with you all because we've done an awful lot of work around D&I over the last few years especially. And we represent basically 100 or so people in quality risk and assurance. They're disparate teams with very different specialisms, from data protection to security to resilience. And so our objectives here is really to try to bring these disparate teams together, to collaborate and to work, across those specialisms. We lead and participate in a lot of diversity inclusion initiatives, setting up our own, but also linking in with the staff networks. And we strive to champion and advocate underrepresented groups, increasing representation of minority voices across the department. I'll just flash out a few things that we've delivered. So as you can see up on the screen behind us, I have a couple of screenshots there of the newsletters we produce, the diversity inclusion calendar, now going for 5 years, and little teacup, lots of tea time talks that we set up. These are all about recognizing staff and celebrating success, our newsletters, role modeling as well. So we've had some lunch and learns from the likes of Peter Tansley on hidden disability. We've had our leader Gurdip Riot share how he celebrates some of the festivals in a calendar. And we've run some sessions to support staff. So most recently, one of the cost of living sessions led by Daniela, who I can see in the audience. So lots and lots of different initiatives, all led by different people in the panel, which is a really, in itself, being part of the panel, as you can imagine, is also another way to really foster that collaboration across the different teams. So I'm really proud, as you can tell, to have the opportunity to be part of the group. Also, lastly, just to call out a couple other things, I've mentioned obviously our new joiners packs. I'm getting the signal, which is good, thank you. It's worth also mentioning we do care about numbers. We run 6-month surveys every year of our own accord, and we've seen some really good results, with 94% of staff saying they feel they're treated fairly, 92% of staff feeling that leaders demonstrate commitment to diversity and inclusion. But as Ben said, it's an ongoing journey. There's more to be done, and so there are particular areas we want to develop on, but I will go into those on another day when we have more time. So, but do come and see some of the products that we produce out in the networking area later on.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all here and over Zoom. My description, I'm doing first time, so please bear with me. I'm Disha Singh. I work as a test lead in Butte, which is broadcast end user technology. But before that, my description, I'm 4 feet 11 inches, short height, brown female, black hair, from Indian origin, and I'm wearing black and yellow floral dress with black boots with high heels because I have to. Okay, and I'm here to talk about what we are doing in Butte, which is fairly new department, but we are thriving in every aspect and also in D&I side. So it's been an incredible and enlightening year in Butte D&I space. We are doing lots in this area, and there is more to do. We have done several impactful all-hands takeovers for Black History Month, Disability and Accessibility Awareness, International Women's Day, and Pride celebrations. We were joined by some amazing panelists for open conversation about their experiences, both generally and at the BBC. And all the recordings available on the Gateway page. So, if you want to have a look, please do so. Not only that, we also carried out D&I Pulse survey to check overall understanding and expectation with all our Butte colleagues, and response was so great. We then took away all the valuable feedback, incorporated those into actions, and now we are working towards creating more inclusive and psychologically safe culture that can enable us to have water cooler conversations with each other. And Butte has its own D&I working group, and we are closely working with COO group. So we are doing lots of things and bringing lots of inclusion with our team members. There's much more to do, and so much more to do and much more to come. So brace yourself for powerful and inspiring future events and get involved. Thank you so much for your time today. And I'm going to hand it over to Ben. Thank you.
And isn't it wonderful to be on the same stage where we record Just a Minute? And I think if we're putting a COO team together, Laura, I think we're victorious because you can talk for a minute uninterrupted on any subject of your own choice. But yeah, and there'll be competition later on if you can work out what Butte means, because I saw some nods around there. What does Butte mean? Business and end user technology. Thank you, sir.
Broadcast.
Broadcast. Oh, broadcast. It'll be fine in the morning. We'll save it in the edit. So let's come back to our panel, and let's introduce Zara, because you are the chair of the Next Generation Committee. What does that mean? What do you do? What is the Next Generation Committee?
So I'm one of the chairs. I chair alongside a colleague called Oscar. Just to give you a brief description, I'm Zara, I'm mixed race. I am 5'3.5" because I'm wearing white trainers that are slightly higher, and I'm wearing a blue linen shirt and trousers. So yes, I'm Assistant Commissioner at Radio 1 and 1 Extra, and I'm also chairing the Next Generation Committee. For all those who aren't familiar and who don't read the aerial bulletin, which I'm sure you all diligently study, we are a subcommittee who advise ExCo on some of the challenges facing the BBC, from the perspective of young audiences and diverse audiences, and also young and diverse staff. So that includes a look internally at what we're doing. I'm going to jump in because I don't want the Oscar music to start playing, but there's often a feeling, and we've spoken about this in the committee, there's often a feeling that diversity is a bit of a project as opposed to an actual permanent cultural, change of material change. And the first bit of feedback that we've had through talking to staff and colleagues and people who have left, and interns in particular, is there doesn't seem to be a commitment from teams at the BBC when people join, particularly in early careers position and those, the lower bands or the bands of apprenticeships and interns, that once they're in through the door and they've fulfilled that the hiring process, they're not guaranteed a positive experience. And one specific example is that there was an intern who joined last year who left after the first morning because they didn't feel like they knew what they were really getting themselves into. They were panicked, they felt overwhelmed, all very normal feelings when it's your first introduction to the workplace. So what would you suggest are the key lessons that managers should take away from experiences like that?
Do you want to go, Zare?
Sure, I'm very happy to go. I actually think that it literally goes right back to the heart of what I talked about this morning, which is we're at the beginning of our journey. We're doing tremendous amount of work related to our very bold and in some ways market-leading commitments to diversity and inclusion. And I think now we're entering a phase where we have to do something with the diversity of our workforce that we have created, and which is to start to think about the idea of belonging, an idea that every human at the BBC can belong because of their uniqueness, not despite of it. And that requires us to look at our entire system and processes across the 5 E's of employee experience. Are our managers trained to make sure that when employees come in, they don't have that sort of a negative experience that you talked about? I think that what you're alluding to, truthfully, are the growing pains because we're at the beginning of our movement. But as we continue to grow, I think the lesson here is how do we create conditions for all our people to succeed, no matter where they are and who they are. It would also require for us to encourage our workforce to be honest, to be more of who they are, right? So to allow, and this is really, Chinny, you can probably attest for me on this one. When my teams ask me for advice, I only have one advice for them, which is to reach for the dial of who you are and turn it all the way to 10. Be more you. I think we all need to do that, and we need to train our company to do that so we don't have mishaps like that.
Amazing, thank you. The next point that we have discussed is that we're seeing increasing numbers of diverse candidates and hires in early career levels and apprenticeships, lower bands again. But the more senior, when we look at the more senior positions, the 50-20-12 target is being met less so. And what are we doing to ensure that we see diversity at senior leadership levels and that there isn't a bottleneck?
So I think I'm happy to take this one.
Oh, amazing.
So I think it's important that we, as we're thinking about improving the diversity within the organisation, yes, as much as we're thinking in the early careers, we should also be thinking in senior positions too. Our 50-20-12-25 targets are actually across the organisation, and I know that Uzair made reference to some of our commitments, and some of the things that we have been doing is ensuring that on our leadership development programmes, there is that 50-20-12-25 representation. We've recently introduced succession planning to ensure that for all of our band F and SL roles, that we are ensuring that there is that 50-20-12-25 representation. So work is being done. It needs to happen kind of more quickly, but there is work happening. One of the other things that we've done is ensured that on our leadership development programs, wherever it is, again, that 50-20-12-25 representation. Now, diversity is one thing, and I think we're doing quite a bit of work there. It can move faster, but work is being done. We also need to make sure that we're working to drive inclusion, and that's the purpose of today. It's ensuring that when we are bringing leaders in at every level, rather bringing people in at every level, including our leaders, we need to ensure that we are creating that environment where people can thrive and they can do their best work and their voices are heard and they're valued and represented, valued and welcome. So it's just important to make sure that as much as we're thinking about diversity, we're also thinking about inclusion, and that work is happening, but it can happen more quickly.
Okay, thank you. And finally, we know that high-level figures are published in the annual report, and the EIR is also annual. How do we ensure that there is more visibility and it's not just like a yearly catch-up? And and kind of something that goes hand in hand with that. How do we actually digest those numbers? Because all we see are numbers and statistics, but what does this mean in a meaningful context?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and actually, I hear that question a lot. People will say to me, with frustration, we just don't see the data, we don't understand. Sometimes we don't believe the data, actually. That's another one, Zara, that I think I often hear. And my instinct, just to kind of share, is my first instinct is like frustration, because we publish so much data. I mean, the BBC shares, that EIR, so the Equality Information Report that gets published every year, of course, in the annual report. And we talk about it a lot, 50, 20, 12, and other areas around that. So we publish a lot of data. I think the challenge is, just as you've said, data's kind of numbers, right? But if you don't have the context or the understanding, and I was reflecting on our audiences team, so the team that really help us understand our audience, the value for all strategy and how we're delivering to our audiences. And it's a slightly different topic, but actually we've got an audience portal now on Gateway that publishes every month BBC Reach. It publishes our daily habit, it publishes For Me, it publishes impartiality. So all our big metrics of performance we now publish. But actually, we don't probably have that same monthly cadence with our D&I data. And I know, Chinny, we're working on a stronger view on Gateway, a consolidation of that material and that data. But one of the things I love about what the audiences team do is you can see vlogs on that performance, or you can go on and get a bit of information about it, and you can describe it. And I think, Zara, we could do more in helping people interpret, exactly as you said, interpret the data. The data's, it's not like we don't have the data, and it is highly visible, and it is published. I think the thing we can do, we need to be thoughtful about, and we need to work on, is the storytelling and the explanation, and what do we do with that data? And I think when people ask me, I don't get access to data, I think my question is also, help me understand what data you're missing and how you want to use it. And I think that's really helpful too, because I think when we can describe, actually, this is the bit of data that I'd really love to be able to use to help my team or to help do X or Y, and that's missing, that's quite specific, and then we can look at it and then really help and understand. So I think we can do more in context setting. I think the data is all there. Mm-hmm. I think we do need to trust the data. The data is accurate. It is audited, our data. Goodness me, if the BBC was publishing inaccurate data publicly, I think we'd really struggle with that and be in an awful lot of trouble. So we do know we need to understand it more. And then I think we also need to be clear about what data specifically is missing and why it's missing and how it can help us when we've got those kind of questions.
Thank you. I think the fear is often that the data is PR'd. I think that falls into the trust thing, so that you pick the best parts of it. But I think that'd be really helpful, the transparency side of it. But thank you.
Great questions.
Yeah, Zara, you're happy with the answers? Do you want to come back on any?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's inevitable that in conversations as large as inclusion and diversity, that there's always going to be an element of wait a tiny bit and things that will happen, and it takes a while for things that necessarily are planted in the apprenticeships and the lower bands. It takes a sec for them to filter up as well, but it's probably a conversation about people that we're getting in as well. If we're lacking those the numbers for inclusivity and diversion and diversity. It's whether we're getting enough people in as well. I think that's a question that managers ask. And yeah, some of the feedback that we've got from hiring managers recently is that whenever they're doing interviews and boards, it's BBC candidates who are already in the system who are shining above and beyond. So I don't know, does that fall into it as well in getting the people we need?
So recruitment is another big part, and I should have mentioned this in my answer the first time, but we do ensure, particularly for Band E and above, that any shortlisting that happens must align with that 50, 20, 12, 25, and that's what we consider leadership here from Band E and above. So it is something that is actively considered. It's done consistently across the board and something that we have mandated for any senior hires, but also just in general across the board. We have done a lot of work to improve inclusivity within hiring. We've had the My Hiring Toolkit think that many people would have seen, that's all about ensuring that we are mitigating and eliminating as many biases as possible from the recruitment process to make sure that as many people can come in as possible. Hope that answers your question.
We've also seen the change, haven't we, since we launched 50 2012. So, the BBC is a 50-50 gender-balanced group now. I think, lots of people don't realize that. We hit that for the first time in September last year. And, so we have an equal number of men and women in our organization. And I think that is fantastic for us to be. We weren't there a couple of years ago. We've got 17% Black, Asian, and minority ethnic staff across our group. We're continuing to track towards that 2012. That's actually also on target. Not yet on leaders. We've got more work to do on leaders, which was the point you were also making, Zara, but on staff as a whole. And then on disability, we've got more. We're only at 10% or just under 10%. I think it is 9.6, 9.7, I think, if I'm correct. And I think we can really do more there. I think that is so important. So that is actually behind the sort of tracking that we sort of performance manage ourselves on in terms of getting to that 12%. And I think both across all staff and across leadership, we really need to think about how we get the representation of our disability colleagues, but actually also recruit, and then, as you were saying, ensure that people feel engaged and can stay in the organization and are retained too, because they are able to do their best work when they get here as well.
Sarah, thank you. One thing, listening to you all, it feels like there's a lot on the to-do list, but is the pace at the right pace? Should we be moving faster in some of this?
So, first of all, I think that the work that the BBC has done over the last 2 years in this space is absolutely fantastic and has happened at a really fast pace. Now, when diversity is a topic that I personally, as a human, feel incredibly passionately about, I think that diverse and vibrant systems can create so much innovation because people can bring diversity of thought and lived experiences, and there's something really powerful there. I think our pace is quite great, but I can understand why that question exists. So I think that when it comes to creating world-class programs that can foster systems of inclusion, there is a bit of frustration because when you're a recipient of a system, an overall system that has existed for a long time, you're impatient. You want that system to change, and you actually want it to change yesterday. You can't wait till tomorrow. So while all the work is happening and all the change is happening, you still keep on questioning and saying, but what about that? And what about this? Why hasn't this changed? I think there's a secret sauce to how you build diversity functions that are lasting and impactful, which is through a lot of patience, through celebrating and remembering that we are so much farther along than we were 2 years ago, and to stay resolute and focused on where we are heading, and continuing to shape that with a positive intent. I think that's super important to remember that, because it does and it will take time to change these systems. We talk about diversity in leadership. You brought that up. I'm very passionate about that. As an organization, as the BBC, we need to build diverse pipelines of talent first, then groom and grow them into senior leadership ranks as well. That takes time. So yes, the pace may feel slow, but I do feel that the BBC are moving at a fast pace, and I do believe that we can continue to do more. Like I said, we're going to focus more and more on belonging. That will catalyze some of our work, speed it up a little bit. And the last thing I'll quickly say is, my ask of our colleagues is, those that are on Zoom call or here in the room, we need your help in order to create a safe space where we can move at that pace. And that safe space requires allowing people to get engaged in absence of fear. If we create an environment in which every person feels that if they just took a small misstep, if they didn't get one thing right, that they will become a center of all attack and finger pointing, then we'll end up isolating and alienating people from the very movement that we aspire to create, from the very world that we want to build, from a very organization that we want to see. So my ask of you is that you stay focused and celebrate what we have built, continue to push together to speed it up. We need to do more, but continue to create a system in which everybody can walk in and join the coalition to build a diverse and inclusive organization, and not stay out of it simply because they're afraid that they'll say something wrong or mess up without being helped through the process.
Thank you. We're going to come to some questions from the audience and that have been coming in. So thanks to Bob, Hannah, Louise, and several others who've submitted questions. But before that, we'd like to include everybody. And Laura, we had to cut off. And we've decided we're going to give her an extra minute to come back onto the stage. are you going to read it from there, to tell us what you were going to say. Isn't that nice of us?
That's so lovely of you. Thank you so much for doing that. And you know,
That's enough time. Thank you.
you
No,
very
just
much. I love this man. We used to work together way back in the English regions. Okay, this is unexpected. I think one of the final things I'd like to say, and Philip touched on this, is just exactly what you were saying, Azzo, which is just advocating for each other, supporting each other. For those of us who are where I am in my career, and I'm quite old now, there's an awful lot of work we can do to support our colleagues. It breaks my heart when I see transgender colleagues feeling that we're not covering the news about them properly. It breaks my heart, and it has broken my heart over the years to be involved in some of the gender wars that we've had, you know, here in this organisation. We are getting so much better, but you're right to say we have a long way to go. And you know, let's those of us who feel that sort of that power and that confidence, let's help everybody else who's still on that journey to get where they need to be. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Laura. Right. So let's get to some questions. We'll go first to Jim, who has written and said, how do we know that our staff survey scores haven't improved because people leaving low scores were more likely to have left the BBC? That's that trust of data, isn't it?
I don't know I don't think we do know, the answer to that question. But I think there are 20,000+ people in the BBC. Not everybody fills in the survey, but I think certainly in the COO group, Ben, remind me, I think 70, 80% actually did complete the survey. So the majority of certainly in the division, but actually by far and away the majority of people across the organization complete the survey. And we haven't lost that many people. You know, I think actually over year on year, I think we've had lots of new people join the organization. Of course, more have left. On a net basis, we're about 400 EFT different in the public service, but across the group, we've actually grown the number of people working at the BBC. So I think your logic would tell you that actually the answer isn't because lots and lots of people have left. There may be some in that, but I think there's far more people who are still here who have contributed to those kind of increases. But of course, the survey's anonymous, so we don't actually know what everybody is answering. What I would say, though, this year is there's been quite a lot of neutral in the survey. So, you know, you can define the survey across those who absolutely agree at the top scores and then are maybe a bit neutral, and then those who fundamentally disagree with the question that's being asked. And I think across all of our survey, we saw, and this is a broader question, not just about D&I, we saw quite a lot of neutrality. Actually, people who were unsure, didn't know, weren't sure. And actually that's, you know, there's a big opportunity for us to really help staff experience something different that moves them into that kind of more positive stance. And I think there's a great opportunity for us there across the survey in general, actually.
Thanks, Lee. Zare, it feels like you...
I was just going to add to what you said, Lee. I think you're so spot on. And I also think that question, we need to get to the heart of that question. I think it might be that mistrust of data, but I think we have to challenge ourselves to step back and say what that question is implying can only happen if the survey were taken as a point in time. But it isn't. The survey is a moving average year over year, purely mathematically speaking. It's not like, you know, as an organization, we wait until everybody who's disengaged has departed the organization. The minute they're out of the main door, we're like, okay, it's time for a survey before more disengaged people come in. It's a moving average. It's not a rigged process. It's really just mathematics at play. There are several people who are engaged. There are several people who may be disengaged. The survey window opens. We get a very high, by the way, rate of response on our survey. Average across industries is in 30-some%. That's not the truth for the BBC. A large percent of our population take the survey, and then we get results that reflect folks that are engaged or maybe disengaged. So I think that purely mathematically speaking, it's just not possible to game it to be that way.
Thank you. We'll come to the audience shortly, so if you want a question from the audience here at the Radio Theatre, please gesticulate accordingly, and we'll get a microphone to you. But first, let's go to Hannah, another question that's come in. Thank you. The idea that we have to declare ourselves as here to be included feels like it places the onus on individuals to put themselves out there to be included. Could or should the BBC be making sure we're inclusive and accessible to everyone at any and all levels, instead of waiting for someone to have an issue with their grievances before we make any changes?
So I'm thoughtful about that because I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. We take the feedback mean, I think we all do, right? Every team leader who's on this call, and there are lots of us on this call who've got leadership positions, I know takes the feedback of their teams really, really seriously. And if you've got a big enough team, certainly for senior leaders, you'll get all those comments. So I don't think when you look at the comments, they're just about taking action on grievances. And I might have misunderstood Hannah's question, and particularly reflecting on the last point. We really need to take seriously all the feedback we get. And there's also lots of lovely feedback in the survey. You know, we often concentrate on the feedback that's negative and we've got to do something with it. But it's also brilliant when our teams share really positive feedback across the survey. I don't think we should not be taking action just when we have grievances. I think this is a continual learning journey and a discussion. I don't know, Chenny or Zaire, if you had any other reflections on that question, or Zara from Hannah.
So I would say that I completely agree with your comments. I don't have any kind of more to add. I do think that we are proactively trying to create. I think this event is actually a testament to the fact that we are trying to proactively create inclusive cultures, and it doesn't need to take an issue or problem for us to start to shape a culture. We try to do it proactively.
But Hannah, if I've misinterpreted your question, please email me, and I will do my best to give you a better answer.
Thanks, Lee. Let's go to our audience. We've got a microphone over at the back and a question. Introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi. Thank you. It's been a really interesting panel. My name is Chinwe Kaluuma, and I'm part of the distribution.
Could you stand as well?
Wave at me. I'm part of the distribution and business development department. It's been
Could
really.
Could you just stand so we can
Oh,
see you?
Oh, okay. Sure.
There we are. Everyone's looking
I'm not
round
that much
now.
taller when I stand. I'm only 5'2", like Laura. My question's around the comments around speed of change. I've been at the BBC for about 8 years. I'm a partnership manager. And within that 8 years, I've done so many sort of different D&I incentives, and, you know, I was part of the Next Generation panel, so lovely to see you, my fellow Next Generation panel person. So I wanted to know, have we done any sort of unique research to look into why there appears to be quite a slow pace of change? Because it's really good to be here and encouraging, but I can say I'm hearing a lot of similar themes that I heard when I first joined the organisation, and I was really excited at that time. Yeah. So 2 questions. What sort of more qualitative research are we doing to understand what's really going on? And I say that because if we're hiring leadership, diverse leaders, and then they're leaving, we end up in this same sort of recurring cycle where we have to, do it all again. When really, what should be happening at this stage is there should be a huge number of, diverse lead. I'm talking more from a leadership perspective, diverse leaders, and we're sort of having a different type of conversation around D&I. We can focus on more, maybe interesting or positive conversations around D&I. And the last part is, what would you say to people that are maybe all D&I'd out because they have been at the BBC for a very long time and perhaps haven't seen the sort of change that they would have expected to see within 8, 10 years or 15 years sometimes? Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
So I'm happy to kind of to give you my view. So I think when it comes to, and I've done D&I in a few different places. I should have said that before I joined the BBC, I used to work at L'Oreal. Before then, I worked at a company called Depop, doing the same thing, driving D&I. And before then, I worked in banking and finance, doing D&I across a number of organisations. Now, one thing I can say from my experience driving D&I initiatives, it does take time. And the part of the reason it does take time is because you're trying to change systems. And I have a colleague in another organization who says, people often say that D&I is not rocket science, it should be really quick. And he says, well, actually, it's not rocket science, it's harder because nobody's been able to solve it. And I share that because we're trying to change systems that society hasn't been able to change. We're trying to correct imbalances that exist in society and have been able to come to the organization. And doing that, it takes time. It takes changing people's perspectives, changing the way people think, changing the way people do things. But also when you're trying to change, we're not also working towards quotas. We've got targets and we're trying to create systems that are going to make sure this stuff is sustainable. It's easy to do it as a one and done. You put somebody in a job, you don't necessarily have the system in place to support it. The next thing you see is that somebody's off, they've left. So we're trying to create systems that are genuinely sustainable. They're going to make a difference with planning for the long term, not for the short term. That said, there are things that we can do to drive things and make it quick. And I have to say, I've been very impressed with the things that the BBC has done so far. So things like coming in and doing that 50, 20, 12, 25 target, setting that, and seeing the way it's been adopted across the entire organisation. I haven't seen anything like that anywhere else. And so I think even things like that have been, I think, is a huge testament to how you can make change, make it quickly. And in 2 years, to see how it's been adopted across the organisation, I do think we should be giving ourselves credit for that. So where things can move quickly, they absolutely should. But when you're designing for the future, when you're trying to create an ecosystem against the backdrop of the world that is unfair and it is unjust, it does take time. So I think it's just kind of maintaining that perspective.
That's right, Chinny. If I may quickly piggyback off of that and add to that, I think, though, your question is really a thoughtful one, to be very honest, and I really appreciate you asking that, because I think the heart of your question, in addition to what Chinny said, gets to the fact that it's this feeling that I've heard this story before. Will change actually happen this time? And I think for those of us who have these lived experiences and living in systems that sometimes we feel like we're outsiders in, we always ask that question. And I think that the easiest way to answer that perhaps is by remembering that proof is always in the pudding. The reality is reality. So the BBC may have talked about diversity for last, I don't know how many years you said, 9 or 10 or whatever that number was. But are things different this time? Have there been chief operating officers in the past that dedicated 2 full days to doing this? 2012, were there director generals that sponsored that body of work within an organization and made sure that senior leaders were held to account through their senior leader indexes to be able to deliver that work? Did we have 9 fully branded, fully staffed employee resource groups within a company before? And I can keep on, did we have a $112 million commitment? Did we have 50-50? And these are really tangible, tactical things. And I think that we have to say, I don't know if that is the answer. My question back is, in some ways, can we look at that, point to that, and say the proof is in the pudding? This time things are different. And the BBC have put their money where their mouth is.
Thank you. Let's try and get another question in from the audience here. I've got one over there. Oh, got one over here to the right. I've got 2. Here we go.
Hiya, I'm Ollie Niemiec. I'm a senior distribution analyst in also distribution and business development, and I also co-chair the Young Talent Network. I just want to say it's been great to kind of hear some of the stories about what's going on really well inside the BBC. But we know we work with so many different partners, so many different suppliers, both across production, distribution, and across the whole industry. Is there a way, and is it on your roadmap, Azir and Chinny as well, to kind of extend what the BBC is doing to kind of better sort of level up the industry as well, sort of not concentrate on what we're doing internally, but also maybe look a bit further, look at the BBC's footprint as a whole, and really kind of bring everyone on that journey with us?
So I'm happy to share. So one of the things that one of our ambitions is to be a leader in this space, and we are held to account for that, particularly on the creative diversity side, which is another area of the business that I look after. One of the things that is a large part of the work that the creative team does is working with production companies to ensure that they are thinking about diversity. We have targets, minimum of 20% of all the production companies that work with us. There has to be 20% diversity, and that's specifically socioeconomic diversity, disability, and ethnic diversity. We do pretty well on gender, so we haven't kind of put any numbers around that, but those 3 areas where they've been historically underrepresented, we won't work with any production companies unless they have that 20% minimum. And so our teams work with the production companies. They do training. They work with them. They talk to them, help them ensure that there's all the different requirements, for example, that accessibility can be met. And our teams actually go out and work with them and partner with them to ensure that that's happening. So we are using our influence and position in the industry to effect a positive change within production companies. And effectively what then happens is that they then go on to ensure that diversity continues as they're working with other organisations and other channels and other networks, ensure that it becomes a ripple effect where the BBC is using their influence to ensure that the industry as a whole, the content that we create and the content that people are consuming is becoming more diverse and inclusive. Hope that answers your question, Ollie.
He's happy, that's good. We're nearly at the end of the session, unfortunately, but what we will do is take all the questions and we will get an answer. So if you've got one in the audience or if you've written in, thank you for that. There is one quick one, actually. I want to do it for Azair. This is from SM, who says, of your 5 E's, which one needs the most work at the BBC? You're against the clock.
Listen, it's like somebody saying, hey, you have 5 kids, which one's your favorite? It's a hard question, that's why I took a pause. So if I think through those 5 E's, I think we have a ton of work to do in all of them. I think if there's one that I could pick where I think the juice is really, really worth the squeeze, I think it's empower. I think if we can empower our colleagues, they will then deliver the best work of their life. Because I think that in order to be successful, relentlessly successful, companies need 2 things. They need collaboration and they need innovation. A company in which people are collaborating and innovating on behalf of the customer or the audiences, in our case, that company is destined to succeed, Ben. That company isn't going to fail. So what sits at the heart of it? Empowerment. When people are empowered, they feel free. What do people do when they feel free? They trust each other, and trust leads to collaboration. They take risks, and risk-taking leads to what? Innovation. So empowerment sits at the heart of driving collaboration and driving innovation, and we can succeed through that.
Brilliant. The juice that needs a squeeze. There's our T-shirt slogan for the year ahead. On that bombshell, thank you to all of our panel members, our audience here at the Radio Theatre, and to everyone, wherever you are in the BBC, thank you for tuning in. There's still lots more to go with the Inclusion Means Business, not only this afternoon, but also tomorrow as well. And let's go to Sean to find out what's next.
Let's have a round of applause. Coming, obviously. Isn't it fascinating? Out of interest, the question about when the disability target was set for 12%, yeah, it's fairly recent. John Major was Prime Minister. It was 1996. But I'm a big believer, I'm sure everybody here is, I believe in inclusion. I don't believe in disability inclusion, gender inclusion. I believe including everybody. And I'm going to let you into a little bit of a secret. I know this comes as a shocker, but there are some people who are disabled, who may be South Asian, black, gay, trans. We're people. So that's what binds us all together. And so ultimately, there is so much work to do. But you know what? The start of wisdom is, I don't know. So can we have a round of applause to I don't know? Even though I think they've got a bit of an idea anyway. Now, who here fancies a cup of tea or coffee? Great. White with no sugar, please. No. We are going to take a short pause. We'll be back momentarily. If you could be back in your seats at 15:15, so it really is a very quick cup of coffee. Again, to Ben Thompson and the panel, thank you so much.